In essence, the game of tennis could be boiled down to a rather simple proposition. The objective of the game comes down to propelling the tennis ball back and forth inside the arbitrarily defined boundaries, namely the tennis court. The ball must be propelled, not by throwing, pushing, dribbling or rolling, but by way of striking it. The one who maintains this activity the longest wins. Easier said than done. For some mysterious reason, keeping this rather basic activity going didn't turn out to be such a simple proposition after all. You'll have to agree that it is rather odd that in the world where millions upon millions of ordinary people routinely master and then successfully perform a dizzying variety of athletic skills, the skills which are way more complicated, way more demanding, and quite often even dangerous to do than a simple striking of the ball with the tennis racket could ever be. But when it comes to handling a fuzzy yellow ball, for some peculiar reason, precious few, even among those who play tennis for a living, to say nothing of all the amateurs, are capable of delivering the confident, reliable, and graceful performances like this one. Instead, we are regularly treated to the embarrassing and stomach-churning spectacles like these. The performances, which could hardly be worth the hundreds of thousands of dollars, which they are reportedly being paid for. What could possibly be making a straightforward task of accurately striking the tennis ball so difficult to perform? The professional tennis players who reach the top of the pecking order are not your average, ordinary folks. By any measure, they are the rare birds. These are highly motivated, hard-working, athletically gifted individuals who spent massive number of hours practicing their craft. And yet, most of these exceptional athletes seem to be incapable of handling the tennis ball with any appreciable degree of consistency, reliability, and grace. Many of them even manage to go through their entire careers having such basic strokes of the game as the serve, for example, completely out to lunch. The skill of handling the ball as a spectacle was always the main attraction of the game. That is why so much time is being spent on developing and sharpening this vital skill. Yet, as we all know, in spite of being the focal point for the players, and the enormous amount of time spent drilling, no coherent consensus on how it should be done has ever evolved. Every coach seems to have his or her own peculiar take on it. And the players go about striking the ball in radically different ways. One is more bizarre than the next. It is pretty much an utter anarchy out there. The players lack any uniformity or consistency in their movements or their actions. Most of them look awfully awkward and clumsy. Their faces are always distorted and their bodies unnaturally twisted. It seems that the only things which these people have in common with each other would be looking permanently constipated, with a painful expression of distress stamped across their faces. This cannot be normal. Why is it happening then? The answer, which is being repeated by the coaches, does not sound like an answer at all, but rather as a way of pacifying the paying clients and making them feel better about themselves. At the same time, it is clearly aimed at deflecting any personal responsibility for the lousy product which they are turning out. First of all, they assert that there is no such thing as the wrong way or the right way of doing things. Anything goes. And everything is praiseworthy. This is a preposterous idiocy. Then, they proclaim that since every player is a unique individual, that their eclectic on-court behavior is simply a reflection of the player's individuality. That it is all natural, that it cannot be helped, and should never be questioned or interfered with. First of all, in absolutely everything that people do, or have ever done, from putting the pants on in the morning, to piloting a jet fighter in the afternoon, there would always be, and let me repeat it again, always be, a single, the very best way of getting it done, and a multitude of other ways of doing the same thing, from mildly inefficient to utterly stupid. Only those who have never done anything in their lives, especially with their hands, in other words, the idiots, could be fooled into believing that it isn't so. The right way is determined only by a somber calculation of getting the job done in the most efficient manner possible. The efficiency is always defined as getting the maximum return on the least amount of investment. In such calculations, someone's individuality can only be factored in as a liability or a hindrance, rather than an advantage or an enhancement. And as for the second point, people are highly trainable and extremely pliable material. Way more than any circus animal could ever be. Adaptability is the single greatest competitive advantage that we have over all other species on this planet. This ability to adapt, to have all those, unquestionably, different individuals, who remain unique in thousands of ways, to come together as one, and to conform to a single standard, and a single mode of operation. That is exactly what is being demonstrated, celebrated, and proudly flaunted, during such glorious events. If any of the nonsense, which these coaches are talking about, were true, and the line between the right and the wrong could never be clearly drawn, and the people were powerless to shape and to transform themselves, to discard the old habits and instead to acquire the new ones, to overcome their personal quirks and idiosyncrasies for the sake of efficiency or some other arbitrarily stated goals, then the people wouldn't have lasted on this planet for as long as they have. And the performances, like this one, would be out of the question. In any trade, or a craft, grace, elegance, and ease are always the true hallmarks of competence and proficiency, while strain and clumsiness are indicative of just the opposite. Tennis is no different in that respect. And throughout its short history, a small group of players, past and present, clearly stands out. Their movements and their postures look refreshingly uniform, almost identical to each other. These players never look strained, awkward, or uncomfortable. Their faces are relaxed and peaceful. As it is often being said about them, they make it look easy. These are the best ball strikers of the game. And as a rule, they would always end up near the top. What makes this group of players so much better at handling the tennis ball? Or, a better question would be, what makes the rest look so incompetent in comparison? The short answer is, most players, literally, don't know what they are doing. Predictably, many of you who are watching this will be triggered by such answer. But before you slam the door and indignantly storm out of this channel, never to return, please allow me a few moments to explain myself. Don't know what they are doing is not an empty insult. It literally means that most players either have no idea of what is taking place during their striking, or the ideas, which they might carry around in their heads, are hopelessly delusional. Are they throwing, guiding, carving, pushing, caressing, or massaging the ball? Or, are they striking it? What is it? I'll bet you anything that each and every one of them will give you a different answer to this question. And yet, this question is as fundamental and profound as it is simple. What exactly are you trying to do to the ball? When you step onto the court, you'd better be resolute and realistic in your intentions toward the ball. Because, if you are not, you will be setting yourself up for failure by plotting the impossible schemes. And all the disappointments and all the frustrations, which will inevitably follow your unrealized expectations, will manifest themselves, in vivid colors, all over your faces. Something which no one can hide. But rest assured, the professional class is just as confused on this subject as your average weekend warrior would be. The roots of this confusion are the early instructions, which everyone is subjected to as a beginner. It all can be traced back to the coaches, who in turn can point you to their coaches, and so on down the line. As the result, most players will be striking the ball in the name only. I understand that such an audacious statement will require a mother of all explanations, just to make a small dent in the protective armor which surrounds this issue. So, here it is. In our modern lives, to strike something is rarely called for. Maybe only to kill a mosquito. Regrettably, the untimely demise of the corporal punishment in schools has contributed greatly to the rapid decline of this vital skill. So it is only natural that the present-day people would be quite unfamiliar with striking, and would know either very little or absolutely nothing about how striking works, what it feels like, and how and when it could be effectively applied. Even the basic skill of throwing, which also suffered a significant decline, has fared a lot better than striking. Humans, as all creatures, instinctively fear the unknown or unfamiliar. For example, people would fear skydiving, riding a bicycle, skiing down the hill, or going into the water, until they get used to doing those things and make them a new normal. It takes a conscious effort, on our part, to overcome those fears. The act of striking is not nearly as scary as the skydiving, but it is not as simple as it might appear to those who never practice it. Striking is by no means an inborn skill. Neither is walking on your own 2 feet. Both of these skills have to be learned, and believe it or not, but learning how to strike takes just as much time and practice as learning how to walk. And the more you do it, the better you'll get at it. People on the whole would shy away from striking, likely because it is too closely associated with violence, destruction, and lack of control. Paradoxically though, this very skill of striking is at the very root of our civilization. As a species, all throughout our history, we had to rely on this skill the most. It wouldn't be at all an exaggeration to say that we owe our very survival to it.
Yeah.
Tennis coaches, just like their students, are quite uneasy about striking. And naturally, their uneasiness would seep into everything that they do, and ultimately, what they teach. Instead of encouraging their students to embrace striking as a viable tool, to explore what it has to offer, and to exploit it to the fullest, they avoid it as a plague, steering their students away from it, and stoking their fears with every stupid drill, and every idiotic training aid they could possibly connive of. They would talk endlessly about brushing, carving, guiding, rolling, and holding the ball on the strings, everything under the sun, never mentioning simple, striking it.
Kind of a massage effect that you're going to feel like you're massaging the ball.
And just practice rolling it for a little while, like that.
The ball, we're coming brushing up the back of the ball with the wrist pronation coming left to right over the ball.
Some coaches, for example, would even insist on literally slowing down their swings as the means of controlling the ball.
But I want you to have faith that this is going to work, because I've tested this and I've noticed that when you actually slow your swing down at the right time, you gain more ball control.
So, it shouldn't come as a big surprise that people never even consider the possibility of striking the ball, let alone confronting and overcoming their instinctive fears. In their minds, they imagine that they are brushing, pushing, rolling, guiding, or massaging the ball. At best, they might fancy themselves as throwing the ball with their racket.
A little bit higher, just push it. You don't need to hit it, just push it over. Very good. Okay. All right, so the second part.
With each practice session, and with every training contraption, such preposterous notions are driven deeper and deeper into the players' minds, to the point when people lose touch with the reality completely. They descend into the world of endless illusions, of petting the dogs, wiping the windshields, coiling, uncoiling, and they promptly lose all orientation there. It is certainly possible to live in a fantasy land, or to talk oneself into believing anything. But neither your strongest beliefs, nor a full agreement of all of your peers, will change the reality. Try as you all may, the ball will not be brushed, or be thrown with the tennis racket, and you will end up neither throwing, nor striking. Not being able to throw the ball, and at the same time, never learning how to strike it. Neither here nor there. What a pickle, I tell you, what a pickle. So, if you want to make sense of it all, you've got to start from the top. This is a throw. And this is a strike. At first glance, these two actions might appear to be very similar. And it is quite understandable how, based on the first impression, one could be mistaken for another, and without further analysis, they may even be regarded as one and the same. But such similarities are only skin deep. These are two fundamentally different mechanisms of propelling an object through space. And they'd better not be confused. In a throw, the force is applied to a stick. In most cases that would be a hand, not a stick. Accelerating stick takes the ball along for a ride. And at some point of that ride, the ball is being released and will continue its journey on its own. In a strike, the force would also be applied to a stick or a racket. But here, instead of going along for a ride, the ball collides with the racket. And, at the instant of collision, it all becomes a completely different ball game.
My name is Paul Furs, and I'm the head of Test Methods Development. Today, we've got a high-speed camera, and we're looking at driver impacts on a variety of balls and a variety of ball speeds. And we're doing that as a teaching point for videos to show people that even if you've got a lower driver speed, that you still compress the ball sufficiently. I gather there's talk out in the world that I don't swing hard enough to play the Pro V, or I don't swing hard enough to play the Pro V1X. Well, honestly, if you compare the 120 mile an hour driver speed to the 175 mile an hour driver speed, and you'll see that the compression on the ball is really quite similar. Today we're shooting 22,000 frames a second. That gives us about 10 or 12 individual frames of the ball on the club face. We've got an exposure time of 15 microseconds, which is a little bit long, but I wanted the images to be nice and bright. And we can look at the mechanics of how the ball impacts the club and how that translates into spin and speed and launch angle. The first time we did this, there were a bunch of things that the ball does that I really didn't expect. We did expect that the compressions would be similar. That was part of the point of going through this exercise, so that wasn't a real surprise. But when the club comes into the ball, ball's round, as best that I can do round with my fingers, the club comes into it, and this side of the ball goes flat. And there are 3 or 4 frames where the ball looks like a D, flat on this side and round here. And then right before it's done, the back side of the ball pulls in like that and then goes out. When it comes off the club face, the ball is actually longer. It's not round anymore. So it does, spring right off the club face. And it's one thing knowing that happens. It's a whole nother thing seeing it. It's really cool. It's a lot of fun.
When the ball collides with the racket, in a blink of an eye, the ball takes off and begins traveling in the opposite direction, outpacing the racket's velocity instantly. At that moment of impact, we are witnessing a rather curious and, it would be safe to say, a magical phenomenon. The collision of two physical bodies. For our purposes, there is no need to get excessively clinical about the whole thing. But there are certain things about this phenomenon which have to be pointed out. If for no other reason than to make it crystal clear that striking and throwing have nothing to do with each other, and to equate them in your mind is a big mistake. There are a few things which should be noted about the throw. First, The acceleration of the ball, as well as the hand or a stick, is gradual and protracted. Second, the velocity of the ball never exceeds the velocity of the throwing implement at the moment of the ball's release. And third, the trajectory of the throwing hand must follow a specific track, or a pattern, which will ultimately determine the trajectory of the flying ball. This is critical, because, if the hand fails to follow the prescribed path, the results could be unpredictable and quite amusing.
I can't decide whether that's the worst first pitch in... Great effort here, but you're going to have to go back to 2009. The official belt holder for the worst ever first pitch of a ball game was Baba Booey, but that one right there is going to give it a run. Well, here's the thing.
But in a strike, the trajectory of the ball is determined by the laws of conservation of energy and momentum, and not by the path of the striking implement, before or after the impact. The striking implement can even be completely stationary, not having any velocity whatsoever, and yet, after the collision, the ball will be propelled through space, just as if the racket was moving. For obvious reasons, that would not be possible in a throw. If, in throwing, the role of the player comes down to creating a suitable trajectory of the throwing hand. In striking, the player's role is not to guide the racket along some specific path, what so many tennis players are fooled into doing, but to facilitate the collision event between the ball and the racket. In each of the strokes, the player is responsible for a one-time delivery of the racket head, with its vector and its velocity, whatever they might be, to the point of rendezvous with the ball. From that point on, the laws of physics will take over and do the rest. After the impact, the whole thing is out of the player's hands, so to speak. While in throwing, the player affects the ball directly, from the start, to the very moment of the ball's release. And the ball inherits the vector and the velocity of the hand or a throwing implement at the moment of the release. In striking, the player affects the ball's behavior not directly, but through a collision mechanism, which is being set in motion at the moment of impact. In a stroke, the ball does not inherit any characteristics of the racket's movement, and the ball's trajectory, after the impact with the racket, will not in any way resemble or mimic the racket's trajectory before or after the collision. To recognize the fundamental differences between striking and throwing is not a trivial matter. It is vitally important for a healthy mental understanding of the processes which you are getting involved in. Getting back to what I have started with, you must know what the hell you are doing out there, if for no other reason but to avoid looking like a complete fool who is trying to control the ball through an excessively elaborate and confusing but utterly useless racket manipulations. Unfortunately, the delusional belief that by twisting oneself into a pretzel, the ball could be coerced into defying the laws of physics, is rampant. Such preposterous notions, akin to some voodoo rituals, are disseminated in earnest, not only by the rank-and-file coaches the world over, but by every commentator and every talking head on television. The former players, also, never miss a chance to jump into the act and show off the depth of their ignorance. The only words which can fully describe the level of awareness and understanding which all these experts exhibit would be, simply, medieval. Delivering the racket head to the point of impact, on time and with the required characteristics, is by no means an easy task. And it certainly gets quite tricky at times. So, it would make a great deal of sense for the players to rid their on-court behavior of any superfluous junk, and get into a habit of executing all of their strokes, as much as it is possible, from the simple, comfortable, well-anchored, and well-balanced positions and stances. Stan, Roger, and Justine are the great examples, and the ideal models of such practical simplicity. Regardless of one's athletic abilities, physical fitness, or God-given talents, contorted and clumsy-looking stances and postures, like these, make it extremely difficult, if not entirely impossible, to deliver the racket head to where it has to be, and thus, to strike the ball with any consistency and precision. It has to be noted that everything which is being taught about striking the ball, these days, in one way or another, directly or indirectly, is based on a single, false premise. That, during a stroke, the ball and the racket remain in physical contact for an extended, and quite tangible period of time. That, by the most ludicrous accounts, the ball remains on the strings of the racket, for up to 8 milliseconds. During which time, we are led to believe, the ball can be steered, brushed, carved and otherwise manhandled. As the result, most people imagine that the mechanism of ball striking works exactly like that. This is a pure fantasy, a classic case of an urban mythology. Most likely, this fiction was first disseminated by the early pioneers of tennis, golf and baseball. Once they let this nonsense out of the bottle, it kept on being repeated but was never revised since. In all fairness, it is hard to blame those guys for such spectacular blunders. They couldn't have known any better. Because, unlike their present-day counterparts, they lacked any tools for examining the stroke, and had to come to their conclusions based on gut feelings rather than any hard evidence. They simply couldn't see what is really going on behind that blur. In reality, the ball never remains on the strings for any significant length of time. It literally explodes off of those strings instantaneously. This can be clearly seen on any high-speed footage of a stroke. After such extremely brief encounter with the ball, the player is left with vibrating racket in his hand, and the lingering sensation of the impact, which lasts a lot longer than a few milliseconds. This feeling, this phantom sensation, is misinterpreted as a long-lasting contact with the ball, and everything, pretty rapidly, goes downhill from there. Based on this illusion, and no physical evidence whatsoever, a great assortment of, quote-unquote, techniques, are concocted, and then unleashed onto the gullible public. Generation after generation of tennis players are being brought up on such poppycock as the follow-through, the brushing of the ball, the acceleration through the ball, the pronation of the forearm, the snapping of the wrist, the windshield wipers, coiling uncoiling, and God only knows what else. All these insidious notions are nothing but clever salesmen's ploys, the bells and whistles so to speak, which contribute absolutely nothing to the actual striking of the ball, but leave mountains of wasted years, bewilderment, and frustration in their wake. Well, the truth of the matter is that all of those so-called techniques have just as much to do with the ball's physical flight as Santa Claus has to do with the gifts under the Christmas tree. The actual duration of the racket's contact with the ball lasts less than 1 millisecond. To put it into a context, that would be the duration of a photo flash. This is simply not enough time, even, to think a thought, let alone to follow it with a deed. All of those, what you might consider very clever racket machinations, before, as well as after the point of impact, are utterly useless, since no physical contact between the ball and the racket exists. And as far as I know, none of the New Age educated pseudo-scientists has ever successfully demonstrated how that could be done without a physical contact. Of course, such an inconvenient fact can be easily overcome with a pile of bullshit, and could never stand in the way of attracting plenty of adherents. Going through some elaborate ritual, and pretending that by doing so, the ball is being affected in some tangible way, is nothing but foolery and a complete waste. Not only of time, but precious physical and mental resources as well. In reality, during the actual stroke, as you can clearly see for yourself, this very tiny speck of space and time is all that you will ever have to work with. Nothing more than that. The speed, the spin, and the direction. Everything must be imparted onto the tennis ball, inside those time and space constraints. Impossible, you say? It is absolutely possible. That's how it was done since the beginning of time. And it is being done around you, all the time. You just have to stop clinging to a fraud-based New Age fantasies, and start seeing things around you for what they are. Be honest now. Could you ever have thought that a perfect, razor-sharp cutting blade can be created by a single blow of a hammer? And yet, here they are. Like it or hate it, but we are living in the day and age of the rapidly occurring scientific discoveries. These discoveries have allowed the production and wide dissemination among the masses a great variety of amazing tools, such as microscopes and telescopes, video and audio recorders, various computers and communication devices, all of which should have greatly expanded and advanced our understanding of the world around us. One could reasonably expect that with the help of all those amazing tools and devices at our fingertips, such things as the atrocious ball striking, along with the inept ball throwing, would be banished, completely eradicated by now. Begone, the way of the polio. Not so fast. In spite of all the leaps and bounds in the fields of technology and science, the humanity overall doesn't seem to be getting any wiser. The depth of stupidity which people continue to exhibit daily successfully keeps up and remains very much on par with all the accomplishments of our collective genius. People are ready as ever to unconditionally embrace all sorts of preposterous nonsense and to believe passionately in all kinds of blatant absurdities. And, as it should be expected, there is never a shortage of those who are just as ready to satisfy those appetites, to supply the nonsense, and come up with the new absurdities. For a fee, of course, for a fee. So, the seemingly endless parade of various dog and pony shows, which promote only ignorance and confusion, will, most certainly, continue unabated. Into the infinity. And
While
beyond.
this takes a while here, you will actually realize when you play with the racket that this can happen in a split second. But if you have the right idea, it's gonna work. You wanna push the ball first and then roll. This also teaches us that the contact is not very short, like in the first instance where we had a loose and short contact. That's the worst way of hitting a tennis ball. So we want to stay a little bit with the ball when we hit it. That's why we want to feel that we're like compressing the ball.
There are 5 key fundamental positions in the forehand. Number 1.
Sterling Hart, on the other hand, is already working on that top block very quickly up into the second springboard position and getting that top cut.
Change the plane. So now Sasha will do this in this plane, in this. Right. So you want to compress and roll the ball. That's it. And after you will
But Sterling Hart has such an advantage here. Only a few more cuts for Sterling Hart.
Close stance forehand. Then he goes and he does his open stance forehand. You can work on developing spin. You can work on developing your grip. You can work on hitting low balls.
Sterling Hart gets it in 43-33. What a great time for the young Canadian Brown. Still trying to get that top block done as he...
Look, I got this here, and I'm going to show you. If I want to hit, down the line, I angle the racket that way. This is down the line, that way. If I want to play cross court, I hit the other way, a little bit farther. Okay. It has nothing to do with position of feet. Here, I want to keep my feet in the air. So down the line, a nice cross court shot now. See, has nothing to do with that. It's just the position. This side is his forehand. Like this. Here, more. Look, like this, into that corner. Put
tennis is so simple, it's just unbelievable.
Yeah.
It's one of the easiest sports to play. And